Hello, welcome. Uh, we're here for a program about preserving LGBTQ plus spaces in Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, and around the country, and the importance of that. And we have several guests here on our panel, and that includes John Pepe, Andrew Dow, and Mucha Placer. And I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves. First of all, my name is John Allen, and I am the current co-president of the New Haven Pride Center, actually the founder, almost 25 years ago. And my particular interest is in preserving New Haven's history. We do a walking tour of downtown New Haven that we generated about 5 years ago called New Haven's Closet, 400 years of queer history in the Elm City. And so at that, I'd like to have each one of our panelists introduce themselves, and we'll get started. John, how would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is John. I am the owner of the Shea. I purchased the Shea almost 3 years ago, and I've been working there since 2003, and I've actually been going there since I was 18 years old, many years ago.
Wonderful. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Dow. I work part-time in the Office of LGBTQ Resources at Yale University as Associate Director, and then spend the rest of my time teaching in women's gender and sexuality studies, partly on thinking about queer histories.
Wonderful. Welcome. And Mucha?
Yes, and so I'm Mucha Placer. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. This is a topic near and dear to me. And I've been a queen for many, many decades and involved in our Hartford Pride and excited about something we did this past year, which is we've always been in silos celebrating Pride throughout the state. And we had the notion to come together even before COVID. And I'm so glad that we did. And we brought together all the different prides. So now there is something called Connecticut Pride, and we've done our first Connecticut virtual Pride parade and festival. And I'm also Dr. Richard Stilson. I'm a psychologist in private practice in Hartford, on the same road as the Shea, the other end of Wethersfield Avenue. And you know, while I was working for the state of Connecticut, this was one of the things I wanted to make sure that throughout our DEMAS facilities, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, we need safe space for folks in recovery in both the mental health silos as well as the substance abuse silos. And so it's been my mission is to help create safe space for folks in recovery around both mental health and addiction.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Mucha, it's I just have to say that you're one of the first people that I ever met when I first came out, and I know that you
really
have just one of the first people that I've known of and met very early on in my coming out process, and so. You know, I just know that you have been so important in, you know, the awareness that we've been experiencing here in Connecticut. And, you know, I have to say, I'm just so proud of our little state. Our little state of Connecticut is so huge, not only in national, but also in world issues. And the things that we do here really matter and have made life better for people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, as we talk about queer spaces and preserving queer spaces for people or places that queer people can be feel protected and that we have ownership in. You know, I wonder maybe we could just take a pulse of like where do we think that we are right now in Connecticut with having spaces that people can feel safe.
I think they're dwindling. I think they're slowly dwindling, and I think that's not good because the younger generation needs a place to go.
Mhm.
You know, I I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to a young person and they, oh, what do you do? I say, oh, I own the Shea. What's the Shea? How do you not know what the Shea is? You know, how do you not know that? You know, a younger person may not need to seek out that type of space because of maybe their own level of acceptance within their family and friends circles. You know, when I came out, I had to seek out those places. I had to find those places, and I think the younger generation doesn't need to, or doesn't know how to. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that they need to stay and they need to exist.
Yeah, I think it's definitely changing. You know, it's I agree with you, John, that you know, I always tried to seek out places that where I could pick up a magazine and you know, meet other people, and not just in bars, although bars and clubs have been so important, but any place, you know, a coffee shop or you know, even the different community centers that have been around the state. But I think that young people are finding community now more online. I mean, certainly what we're doing
Yeah.
right now. And it really is, it seems like a changing dynamic, but I agree with you. I think that the physical spaces are still very needed.
Yeah, and I think if anything, this COVID-19 and the proliferation of online and remote events has shown that there has been a glaring gap in virtual programming. Just seeing what centers around Connecticut, around the world are doing, I think has shown that even as we see physical spaces continually under threat by app culture and the kinds of connections that are forged online, the kind of organic networks and community that forms, the friendships that form in physical spaces that aren't just focused on particular desires, the kind of byproducts when people go to a bar, perhaps with one thing in mind, and then leave with a set of three new friends. We'll talk them through the heartbreak of not finding what they expected when they were going to the bar. I think there's a lot of space for that, and it's inspiring to see so many people thinking on their feet and creating these incredible spaces where people can connect and learn more about themselves and their communities in the absence of access. So hopefully we'll see a growth in both the virtual spaces and physical spaces being preserved coming out of this.
Right. You know, Mucha, I think that, you know, your comment about the different silos, about how, you know, we tend to celebrate in silos, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of cross pollination. I think that that's been very true, and I think more. It speaks to why community centers and the clubs are still so important, and I wonder. You know, you've sort of traversed all of those things. You were out in Connecticut when we didn't really have a robust infrastructure, and now you know, what do you see?
Yeah, thank you, John. And so I came out in 1982 at the very first Pride celebration, which was on the old State House downtown, on the back lawn of it, and there were about 100 of us huddled together, and some of us had to wear masks because this was before protections, before the gay rights bill and the extension of trans rights. So we were afraid, and some of us were courageous without masks, but others had to use a mask. And so we had at that point beginnings of safe spaces that were places like the Reader's Feast and Arts and Leisure Cafe, which was on Zion Street, and a coffee house, which was within MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, would have events. And those are all gone. Like you've said, the actual places have gone, been replaced by some. So Shea is now one of the meccas, and Toussaint in the West End of Hartford. And for trans women, never felt always safe to venture into queer spaces. There still is Real Artways in Hartford, And that has provided a safe place for trans women who are beginning their gender journey and wanting to venture out and dance with someone that they were attracted to and not feeling comfortable in queer spaces, but in a mixed space felt more comfortable in doing so. So those are the socializing places. But then we need to think about shelter. You know, so many of queer youth are put out. And, you know, I'm a little fearful as Robin steps down from True Colors.
I
She's
know.
played a vital role in being the clarion to sound the bell when queer youth have been put out of their house or pending being put out, because she, you know, gets the network going of alerting everybody to the needs. And, you know, that's going to be a real loss. So I'm hoping she'll never retire, but I know she needs to. But that is a vital aspect of what's still needed is, you know, safe shelter for queer youth. You know, as the mother of the House of Pleasure, we provide a virtual experience. We really don't open our houses, but we have this virtual experience like on Pose and all the other shows you now see about houses. And that's provided a great link virtually to queer youth who are starting to, you know, do their gender expression and wanting acceptance. So, you know, we need to expand around providing shelter and safe space for queer youth in Connecticut. Yes, we've advanced a lot, but this has always been talked about. But I know the Pride Center is doing some great things, and Fairfield, the Triangle Community Center, but that's a real ongoing next step, I think, is safe space for queer youth.
I think to bounce off what you said, which I think it's very important that the community centers are they're nurtured, because I mean, I had an experience last week. We host an open stage at the Shea every Thursday night, and there was this huge group of people that came, and I think it was a table of like 8, and they came to see their child perform. And after the show was over, this performer brought down the house, and I went up to them. I introduced myself. Come to find out, this performer was 16 years old.
Wow.
And their mother and father came to see them perform, their first time ever in a queer space. And it just moved, it like touched me in such a way that, you know, it made myself feel proud that the Shea was the place that this performer first experienced, you know, if we had, you know, if the Shea wasn't there, where would that person go? You know, where could they go?
Right. You know, the bars and the clubs are so vital to, they still have a vital role to play in our community, because, you know, where do people go when they want to celebrate or when they want to first explore? I know, you know, for myself, I had really only known about the clubs, the bars to go to when I was coming out, and how long it took me to go. But, you know, if I hadn't have had that, I don't know where I would have gone when I was first coming out. Yeah. So, you know, I'm curious about, how do you think the bar scene is, you know, the clubs and the bars, what is their financial health? How are they doing in our state? What do you think?
Personally, I mean, I think the Shea is in an okay place financially. Since our reopening on June 3rd, we've been doing okay. You know, not great, not where we were. It's not. I don't think it's ever going to be where we were. And I think the whole aspect of the nightlife is evolving, is changing. I think midnight is the new 2 a.m. You know, because we have our shows, and they get out at 10:30, 11 o'clock. We stopped serving food at 11 o'clock, and then people slowly dwindle out, and by quarter to 12, 12:15, the place is empty. So I think 11, 12 o'clock is the new 2 a.m.
Wow.
You know, I think if we can continue to maintain what we're doing right now, that the Shea will be safe.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, let's hope so, you know, because that's where people go when they want to celebrate. You know, when we have these wonderful events occur, or when we have, you know, periods of tragedy, this is where they go to want to, you know, connect with others, you know.
I mean, me personally, when I came out at 16, my mother brought me to, I think it was the New Haven Pride Center. What was the New Haven Pride Center before the Pride Center?
What was the New Haven Lesbian and Gay Community Center?
Correct. Wasn't it on the street that the theaters are on? The Schubert? It wasn't.
At 4 different locations. We started at One Long Wharf for a year, and then we were out at 55th Street by Southern Connecticut State University for about 12, and then we went to West Haven for about 4, and now we're at our current place. I think we're in our 5th year there.
I remember when I was 16 years old, my mother took me to one of those places so I can be with. You know, I was 16. I didn't, and it was a gay and lesbian youth group, and that's
you know, that could have been AIDS Project New Haven, which is now called A Place to Nourish Your Health.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've had various groups. They're one of the oldest in the country. Still in operation. They started in 1983. You know, the thing though, Andrew, I wanted to ask you. You know, now that you're connected with the colleges. You know, there's always been this sort of town gown situation between Yale and New Haven, and you know, but the colleges, and I think it's you know, Yale and many of the other colleges in the state tend to be insulated. And I wonder, you know, what kind of, you know, we've tried to get in with some of the many different groups, the affinity groups at Yale, but they tend to be closed. And, you know, while, you know, will listen to us, and I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, so I think having the New Haven Pride Center back downtown has been incredible in terms of allowing for more connections, people to attend events at both. Obviously, there's more of there are more people from campus who are going to events at the New Haven Pride Center just because I think the question of access, feeling comfortable coming onto a campus that has historically not been welcoming to people from outside of the community or even people within its own community in various ways. There's a lot of work to be done there to repair and to create those connections. But especially with Patrick's incredible energy and just the proliferation of events that he has brought to New Haven and the visibility that he's created downtown for LGBTQ plus people that just emanates outward has not only been an incredible source of inspiration for programming, but also helped to draw more students into connection with people in New Haven, in the community, and I think created a lot of inroads for that those connections to continue to develop. I think on our side, having the Office of LGBTQ Resources, we're still fairly small. We're now at 1.5 people in terms of full-time staff. So 3 of us who are half-time employees in the office, and now we have a small student staff. Having that kind of institutional continuity has also been helpful, like having the affinity groups where with students, they're in and out in 2 to 4 years, and staff will cycle through leadership positions. So each few years, it was kind of like recreating the wheel and new connections being forged, old ideas resurfacing, or now having more of a enduring connection, I think will make it so that we'll continue to make better connections and be more present and be more inviting We had a few student-led initiatives this past year before everyone was driven away that were connected to the Pride Center and helped to prompt some of that cross-pollination with people getting more connected and involved with both. So hopefully we'll be able to increase that with whatever safety measures are necessary, and also make use of virtual tools in the coming semester.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to how important those queer spaces are, certainly within the educational communities. They're just vital. And they tend to, you mentioned the ideas are constantly reoccurring. Yeah, because everybody's coming and going every 4 years. So, the same ideas keep popping up. I know. But all the, it seems like many of the colleges in Connecticut definitely have a queer presence and, and a group. I'm pleased. My own alma mater is Southern Connecticut State University. They have a very robust, queer center, and and that leads me to up in I'm focused so much on the history in the New Haven area, but in I know at Central Connecticut State University that they have a wonderful historical repository of Connecticut Pride, some of the other organizations that have come and gone in Connecticut. And I wonder, Mucha, if you are able to speak about that at all.
Yes, happy to. And so I'm not sure how many years, it's been at least a decade, I think, that Central's library has been a repository of all of community organizers, materials that felt that it was important to preserve, that we have brought, like the feminist library of Carolyn Gable and Leslie Brett have been brought there, and many of us as organizers have brought our materials there. And what's exciting that's happened actually last year was you remember that Bill Mann, who's now referred to as Will Mann, is a professor now at Central. He's really helped to bring materials from the repository out, because it's just always been that we've gone there and had a little social event and acknowledged the library's efforts. But he really was instrumental with a class that he teaches at Central to connect with the Connecticut Historical Society. And they did an amazing set of 8 panels, not just our recent history, but going in Connecticut. Has everybody seen this?
No, I wasn't familiar with it.
Oh, good. I get to teach you about this. It is amazing. And so it was probably more northern that we had it at Pride's here in Hartford and elsewhere, but it's now virtual, that it's going to be an ongoing online means to submit materials. And so, Andrew, I'd encourage you to get in touch with because I know this is an area of interest for you, to get in touch with the Connecticut Historical Society. The person that I've worked with is Eileen Frank, and she is wonderful. And they developed these 8 panels that go back to like 1600 in Connecticut. Queer history, can you imagine? Back in the 1600s in Connecticut. And to up until last year, 2019, and it was done for Stonewall 50. But this online opportunity to continue to feed in aspects of our community that are historical pieces is what we need to do. Make it a living history, continue to, replenish, not, just when somebody wants to clean out their basement, but really when a significant event happens, that we, get it fed into this online repository that the Historical Society put together. And you can see the panels there. We're hoping for Hartford Pride to make it more visible, which will be our September event, second weekend in September. We're hoping to bring that virtual aspect out and make it a part of our festival. But that is something that all our community organizations need to start remembering, that we need to preserve our history. Not down the road, not make it a 5-year, 10-year plan, but as things happen, we need to see this maybe as one of the vehicles for capturing that history. I know that in Hartford also, Keith Brown is one of our institutions with Gay Spirit Radio. He's close to 40 years.
I
He's
know.
been on the air and he's never missed. Do you believe this?
No,
Never missed a show in close to 40 years. And luckily, they developed a grant to archive all of his shows, thanks to a wonderful woman by the name of Ira Revels. Worked with some of the youth at True Colors. So all that history is maintained. 40 years of a radio show has been archived. And then I have to do a shout out to Jerry Marie. Jerry Marie Lysigan, founder of the Connecticut Trans Advocacy Coalition, is up to like either 5 or 6 YouTube videos capturing trans history. Last night we did part 2 of a Sylvia Rivera documentary that's amazing, an autobiographical documentary. And
you know, Sylvia
Zoom
came to the New Haven Pride Center in
she did.
Yeah, yeah, I'm working on a write-up of that. Yeah, we've got Stonewall royalty in New Haven.
Excellent. Yeah, and she came up to Hartford and spoke at Trinity. So we feel fortunate to have, you know, met her while we had her. But there was no documentaries until Jerry Marie did this one. You know, there's been several for Marsha, which is really fitting. But there was never one on Sylvia. So now there is. But Jerry Marie continues with Richard Nelson to put out these fabulous videos documenting history here in Connecticut. And then some of the millennials are stepping up. I've worked with Nicole Cole on Connecticut Virtual Pride. And then, of course, Ephraim Adams is starting to document history as part of his things, which he has done this New England Virtual Pride, which shows some aspects of our history. So we need to nourish and mentor and, you know, encourage next generation too to step up and to continue to get bit by the bug of the importance of documenting our history.
Yes, I agree. Well, you know, I think it was what it was about maybe 15 years ago. We first Frank Gagliardi was at Central, and
Yes.
I think he started you know, gathering the documents, and we've got a couple things there from the Pride Center in the library collection. We have our Rainbow Support Group, which is the oldest. The first of its kind that I know, Mucha, you know very, very much about too. We're still meeting after, you know,
That's
22
wonderful.
years. People supporting people with intellectual disabilities that identify as LGBTQ, and we've got a video, and our book is in there. And yeah, he's also kept the early newsletters that we used to do at the Pride Center, and they're there. And it's so important to have that. And I know the Connecticut Pride's, all of their information is there at the at the Central Library too. But you know, Yale has done a remarkable job as well, in part thanks to Larry Kramer, who has you know, been very generous to our center early in 1997, and with his archives. And you know, I don't know if you've been over to see, I guess there's 2 libraries at Yale that actually have queer history, and the one is at the Beinecke, and the other is for more of Connecticut, that sort of rivals what, as I understand it, rivals what is at Central Connecticut State University. Are you aware of that, Andrew?
Yes, yeah. So we have a great diverse range, as you mentioned, like the Beinecke really starting with Carl Van Bechten's efforts to forge ties between Yale and Fisk and HBCU with their archival collections related to the New Negro Renaissance of the 20s and 30s, focused in New York. But then continuing on with more national figures, New Haven Connecticut figures and beyond at the Beinecke. Manuscripts and Archives has also just done an incredible job in recent decades, as you mentioned, and with a collection that more closely mirrors what's at Southern, with tons and tons of documents collected from people who were staff members on campus, faculty members on campus, alums living locally, local community members, just everything that they had in their basements, in their attics, displayed on their walls. So there's just an incredible wealth of things, both from people's local lives, but then also showing the incredible transnational, international, and national connections that sustain queer identities.
Yeah, I know. Michael Moran gave us the Pride Center a tour of some of the archives, just a sampling of them from the Beinecke, and it was just amazing because, you know, so much of our history really is what, you know, Mucha was talking about. We have the history, we're sort of have history that's coming out of the basements of people that, you know, over the last several decades. But the stuff from, you know, the last couple of centuries, that's the things that has been hidden. It's been completely erased from our, you know, local vernacular. And how important that is, and to see some of it at the Beinecke, you know, early, you know, things like Daughters of Bilitis and, you know, the One magazine and things when Oscar Wilde came to Connecticut in 1885, and you know. I don't know, Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, the chairs that Picasso designed and they stitched together. I mean, things like that are just so amazing to see, you know, right here in our state, and how, you know, just how proud it makes you feel to be a part of that, you know, to see it and realize that we are, you know, trying to resurrect some of these things. But as Mucha said, you know, we have history that goes back 400 years with the founding of the Connecticut and the country. Not always good, you know. As I talk about in my tour, New Haven was the first site of the public execution of someone for sodomy on the New Haven Green, and he was a founding father of the town of Guilford, one of the signers of the covenant to create the town of Guilford. And he was executed in 1646, hung on the green in New Haven.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're going to love seeing this Historical Society exhibit, John.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm wondering if they captured that. I wish they had gotten in touch with you as they started to put it together.
You know, Chris, I think his name is Chris Wiggin from the Connecticut Historic Society. He came on my talking tour.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and you know, it's certainly one of the things that we talk about. But you know, Judy Garland was in town just a couple weeks before the opening of the world release of The Wizard of Oz with Mickey Rooney in New Haven at a theater called the Popeye, which was the 102nd largest theater in the country on Church and Grove Street in New Haven, for a sellout crowd with Mickey Rooney as a young teenager. And 3 weeks later, The Wizard of Oz was released. I mean, you know, that's the kind of stuff that you have to do some digging, and it's a lot of time to dig for a tiny little piece of the puzzle. You realize, you know, these incredible things have been occurring around us, and we just don't really, you know, they haven't been adequately archived. You know, and speaking of adequately archived, you know, the bars have been so important, and especially the Shea. I mean, I can't imagine in my lifetime, you know, Hartford being without the Shea. I mean, it's where so much queer history happened in in Hartford, and that has certainly impacted the things that have gone on around the state of Connecticut. Because it's the seat of power for the state.
When I was doing some cleaning upstairs, I mean, I came across boxes and boxes of papers and magazines and articles, and we just a whole bunch of stuff up there, and I just sat there and just kept going through it. Oh my God, remember that happened? Remember that happened? So I mean, I personally have stuff from years and years ago. So
and you keep it, and
yeah.
if you don't open your own museum, then you've got to.
No, I'll give it up. That's fine. I'll contribute it to whatever exhibit needs to see it. That's
yeah. And, John, that's the thing that I think is so important, because this was when I was doing some research years ago for an article for Connecticut Magazine about a black jazz club in New Haven. And this was where all the greats came through. It was called the Monterey Cafe out on Dixwell Avenue. And you realize that so many major people came through there. Paul Robeson and Nat King Cole and Josephine Baker and Ruth Brown. All these people, they called it the race circuit, and they went all through Connecticut and New England, and they would go between New York and Boston. And they stopped at this little club that started in 1939 in New Haven and ran really until the 1980s. But during that time period, there was no real discussion about this in the society pages of the New Haven Register or the arts section, because it was outside of what was traditionally covered. They covered the more highbrow stuff of the symphony and the galleries and that sort of thing. And it's the same thing with our industry, our community, in that the bars are where so much of the important stuff happened for here, Connecticut, and yet it was really outside of what was being covered. It's only been recently that you would even get a mention in maybe the Hartford Courant or in some of the other things, I would imagine.
Yeah, we've had a couple articles about the Shea and the Hartford Courant over the past year. Part of my vision for the evolution of the Shea is I want to start bringing in LGBTQ plus live music. I want to make specific nights for bands, for artists, for we have our open stage on Thursday, and that's for drag kings, drag queens, any kind of performance that you want to put on. But I also want to create specific nights for the LGBTQ plus bands, music, artists, saxophones, whatever you play, whatever you want to share with the community. I'm in the process of creating those nights right now.
Wonderful. Yeah, you really have to continue to keep reinventing yourself to be, current to the. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Well, and Connecticut really, I think about the one thing that when I think of history in Connecticut, I think about also the Cedarbrook Cafe that was down in Westbrook. And John, you might remember that. I don't know, Andrew, if you do, but it literally was because, Connecticut has always been, our history tends to either float toward New York or Boston area because they're the big draws. And, Connecticut's still a very provincial state with all these tiny little towns, and people can still be, fearful about coming out. But it was like, described as the Studio 54 of Connecticut. Even though it was just a dump, and but it was our dump.
I was 17. I snuck into York Street, and I met Ralph Arena at York Street. And I was young, I was naive. A bunch of us got in his car, and we all went down to the brook. And you're right, it was a dump. But I feel I had this conversation with someone probably a couple of weeks ago about the renovations that I've done at the Shea. 20 years ago, our community was forced to go to bars. We had no other place. Okay. So the owners of these bars did not need to do any renovations. It was a dump. It smelled like beer, and the carpet was dirty, and the bathrooms were disgusting. You had to put zero effort into because we were forced to go there. Okay. Now you have a choice. You have a choice of where you can go. So you cannot have these rundown spaces anymore. They have to be, up to par with mainstream, restaurants, nightclubs, bars, music venues, etc., etc. And that was one of the reasons why, I did all the renovations at the Shea to bring it up to a certain type of level where it was not acceptable to have a stain on the carpet or, a leaky faucet somewhere. Because it wouldn't be acceptable, at Max Downtown or, Trumbull Kitchen or any of those, nice restaurants.
Yeah.
But the owners of those places did zero work and zero renovations because they said, hey, they're going to come there anyway. Why do we need to spend the money to make them look nicer or better?
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the Brook was that also got started in 1939, and it did 1939. It was a straight couple that owned it.
81 years ago.
And it was Eddie Bowe was the owner. He was quite the character, and he knew how to squeeze a nickel. And he squeezed it out of a lot of queer people. And but the funny thing was, it operated across the street from the state police barracks. Across the street, literally across the street, not more than, I don't know, 100 feet away. And now this is at a time in 1939, Connecticut was the second state in the country to repeal the sodomy laws, 1970. So second state, we've always been very good with LGBT issues, and that was certainly a success. But this is 1939 when you could be arrested for being gay. And yet here we are operating a bar across the street. I mean, that's really something.
John, at the time of the Cedar Brooks closing, wasn't it one of the oldest gay bars in the country?
Yes, it was. I actually did a story for Connecticut Magazine about that as well in 1999. And they were going to close it at the time because the property in Westport on Route 1, a half-acre lot, was just worth millions of dollars.
Millions,
in 1989 it was. And when I did some digging and found out that it was the second oldest continuously operating bar in the country, the first being Cafe Lafitte in Exile in New Orleans, they had a change of heart and realized the historic significance of it. Clem Bellars of Stamford bought the bar, and which is much like you, John. He came out in the bar when he was a teenager and spent his life there. And he kept it open for about another 10 years. And, things really changed at that point. People were finding the Triangle Community Center was very robust at the time. People were finding other places to go and meet. And so it just, and the financial pressures just became too great.
I think, this is my personal opinion, I think social media, I think the fact that homosexuality is more widely acceptable. It's in the mainstream everywhere. Everywhere you go, you see it in mainstream. And unfortunately, the hookup apps are the demise of the gay bar, so to speak. You don't need to go to them anymore. You don't have to go to them. So that's why I feel that they're dwindling.
Well, once again, you have to really reinvent yourself, and I think that I'm encouraged to hear the things that you're doing, because there is a need for queer space. The New Haven Pride Center is the only queer gallery space in the state. the only one.
Wow.
So find your niche and work it.
Yes.
You know?
I think also
yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say also one thing that always strikes me is talking to younger people who are who bemoan the demise of like historic gay establishments. My first question is always, why aren't you going to the ones that we have? Like, keep going. But the way in which learning about the history really draws people to these spaces. Like it goes from, that bar over there, like I've never been there, I don't know if I'll ever go, to like, oh, so and so was here 40 years ago, like, oh, this bar has been around and has been operating for decades and decades. I think that also inspires some investment. So it's exciting to hear all of these awesome stories from your past and just about the longer history of Connecticut's queer roots. Hopefully that will also inspire people to go out and check out the current version of these spaces and communities.
Correct.
Yes. Could I echo that, Andrew, that I've learned so much from you today, John. I think, has anybody seen that there's like a virtual tour of the village that's happening this month?
Yeah, they're charging $50. My tour is free.
Yeah, I want you to do a virtual tour of Connecticut. Expand on this, because I think it's fascinating, and we could learn so much. All that knowledge that you have uncovered has been very valuable for me just to hear, and I know others would as well. I think this would be a great virtual tour of Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, on my tour, I mentioned 40 queer events or queer spaces that are in all 9 squares of downtown New Haven. And on the walking tour, we touch on them. But, from like when Vicky Sue Robinson played at the Neuter Rooster, which is now called Von Dome bar, to the New Haven, NU Haven dirty bookstore, where you could go up and go upstairs. A lot of people know that. I of course only went there to pick up my magazines and newspapers. Two, Yale University having the most infamous bathroom in the basement of Wolsey Hall. Infamous. It's listed in the Dameron Guide of.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, and I have a picture of it too, because they've got it locked up now.
Yeah,
floor to ceiling stalls, so that was just perfect for going in there between intermission trysts. So
no, I'm serious. Are you did that live, right? The virtual tour of.
I haven't yet. No, I've talked about it. One of the things that we have
virtually. I think it's wonderful. You need to do it with
that
slideshow to go with it.
Yeah, it would be. Well, there's certainly a tremendous, and these are just little tidbits that people tell you about. That come your way. The more you talk about it, you realize, oh my God, people have these historical things that, someone just gave me a box of AIDS Project New Haven early documents because they were cleaning their basement out, and they said, John, would you like to have this? These are the early records of AIDS Project New Haven from 1982. Wow. One of the first AIDS projects in the country. Wow. I mean, this is the stuff that we need to have, and why I'm so grateful that Frank Gagliardi started the Central Connecticut State University, and why Larry Kramer was so instrumental in helping to start the flags program at Yale. Mm-hmm. I know David Knapp, one of our major benefactors of the community center. His papers are supposed to be given over to the Beinecke, amongst all those others, because he was the Boy Scout who was fighting to open up the Boy Scouts when he was, so horribly maligned as an executive with the Boy Scouts for being gay. Yes. I mean, there's some, and it happens in Connecticut. That's what I love about it. We have a fantastic state. I love our state. The politics and the culture, it's just so great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, does anybody, we're in our last remaining moments. I wonder if we can just sort of, what do you think is on the horizon, and what do you think that we need to do in order to, continue to preserve LGBT spaces here in Connecticut?
Well, I certainly feel inspired by the robust discussion of history and historical spaces and transformations over time. In terms on the teaching side, I'm thinking about how I might be able to use digital archives to get students excited about these histories, and then when they return to campus, delve deeper into the documents, digitizing them, figuring out ways to share them with our community. And then also excited to, once things are back to normal, to continue encouraging people to patronize queer establishments and to not wait until they're mourning the loss of queer spaces, to recognize the value that they have for the community, and to figure out ways to get connected, to create the things that they're hoping to see, to engage with drag nights and other exciting nights, etc. So I feel invigorated. Thank you for that.
Well, that's great. I feel invigorated by hearing about your things too. That's so great. Yeah.
And I want to just echo that. I've found this real interesting and fascinating. I want to encourage you, John, to do that tour. I'm serious, because I think that's one way. And then recording it, keeping this public record, and then exporting it to YouTube, so that there is a means for historically down the road to capture our history on an ongoing basis. Andrew, I want to encourage you to, pleasure to meet you. I want to encourage you to connect with William Mann, who used to be the editor of Metroline, our LGBT magazine, which is no longer, but he's a professor at Central, and he has done what you're hoping to do with the archives there at Yale. And I think he could, provide some guidance as to how he
and a major author too, a celebrated author.
Has published at least 4 or 5 great books. So I'm really encouraged. But the last thing is that we need to mentor the next generation. I'm realizing, as I'm continuing these decades, to to share our skills with younger generation, and do some mentoring.
They need to know our history.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. Teach, but also share with them how they can get involved.
Right. That's so important, Mucha. And I also just want to say, thank you for being out there, being so out loud and proud, because we've, just been the beneficiary of your bravery and your fun. You're just fun to be around, and I'm just so grateful that we have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure.
MySpace, the Shea turned 44 years old this year. It was opened in June of 1976. And ironically, I was born in June of 1976, so I'm the same age as the Shea.
Wow.
So Nick Marino, who is a professor at Trinity College, expressed some interest in doing some research and making the Shea a historic landmark. The state of Connecticut follows federal guidelines as far as that's concerned. So you have to be in business for 50 years. So we got 6 more years to go. So when we hit that big 50, it's full steam ahead trying to make the Shea a historic landmark.
All right. Oh, how wonderful. Well, we have to make sure that happens, John.
Yes,
that's important. So keep reinventing and making sure that we have the Shea around for for eternity. Yeah.
I hope so. That's my plan.
Well, that's great. Well, at that, I think we've come to the end of our show, and I just want to thank my panelists, John Pepe of the Shea. Shea Est in downtown Hartford, Andrew Dow from Yale University. Thank you so much, Andrew. And Mucha Placer of Connecticut Pride, and all around fabulousness. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And this is just, I've just really enjoyed this incredible discussion about continuing to preserve our history and our safe spaces, both in physically and virtually. I think it's that's the thing that I'm taking out of this. But at that, thank you so much, and we'll see you on air.
Yes.